Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. In this video, I'm going to be answering the question, will we ever see another high-profile defection? And I'm referring, of course, when I talk about high-profile defections, to the defection of Raymond Franz, author of the book Crisis of Conscience. He actually wrote the first edition in 1983. And Raymond Franz was so significant because he had been a governing body member for the best part of a decade. He knew the organization inside out. He'd seen its inner workings. At the very apex of the organization, he'd seen how decisions were made. And so he was able to give a first-hand perspective that was very damning in exposing the failings of the organization and how cruel and unloving it is. And what was amazing really about Ray Franz was his ability to communicate in a very kind, loving, non-bitter way, so that almost anyone who picks up his book, and almost any Jehovah's Witness who is able to make it through the first few pages, is drawn to reading the rest, because they can see that this is not an individual who lives up to the stereotype of what an apostate is supposed to be. This is clearly, or this was clearly, a very kind, loving man who defected from the organization for very justifiable reasons of conscience. And the question we can ask is, will there ever be another? Because Raymond Franz's book will always be useful, will always be invaluable in helping people wake up from the organization, even decades into the future, I'm sure. But it is still kind of captive to its time. It's describing an organization that in many ways no longer exists. The organization is changing so much and so rapidly that it's almost unrecognizable from how it was even when I was a Jehovah's Witness and I stopped attending meetings regularly in 2011. It's just becoming more unrecognizable with each passing year. So it would be nice to think that future generations will have a more up-to-date version of the failures at the top of the organization, or a more recent defection, shall we say, that will shine a light on the way decisions are made in this JW Broadcasting, JW.org era. Wouldn't it be nice if that could be the case? What's the likelihood of it happening? I think there is a likelihood of a defection, but I'm sorry to say I don't think that we will ever have a defection as impactful as that of Raymond Franz. Why do I say that? Raymond Franz was one of the, you could say, founding members of the governing body. So he joined the governing body in 1971, which was essentially when the governing body arrangement began. It would be another few years, 1975, until the governing body would wrest powers from the presidential arrangement and take on new powers so that it would be more like the governing body that Jehovah's Witnesses are familiar with today. But nonetheless, Raymond Franz joined the governing body when the governing body arrangement was in its infancy. And it was more likely, I think, that people would be invited to join the governing body in that time based on their knowledge, their character, their personality, based on positive attributes that they could bring to the table, and not simply based on their ability to look the other way when it comes to the worst aspects of the organization. And I think what's happened in the 50 years since 1971, we're obviously now in 2021, I think the governing body arrangement has evolved over that 50 years so that when new members are appointed to the governing body, it's not necessarily about how spiritual they are. It's not necessarily about their positive attributes, their personality, their leadership skills. It's mostly about, are you a yes man? Are you down with perpetuating this toxic system that you're inheriting? Because when you look at each and every member of the governing body today, in 2021, we're talking, let me see if I can remember them without looking at the screen. Stephen Lett, Tony Morris, Jeffrey Jackson, David Splain, Samuel Hurd, Mark Sanderson, Kenneth Cook. I always forget one. Gerrit Loesch makes up the 8th. Sorry about that. When we look at the 8 members of the governing body today, in 2021, every single one of them has some experience in the service department. And the service department is where the skeletons are. If you spend time on the service department, if you are involved to any great degree in the way the service department operates, you are waist deep in the cover-up of child sexual abuse. You're coming into contact on a daily basis with the worst of the organization, with the fact that it keeps this database of sexual predators that doesn't get handed over to the police, allowing these individuals in many cases to just keep on accumulating more victims. You're complicit in that. If you spend any time at all in the service department. So it's not a coincidence, as far as I'm concerned, that every member of the governing body has had some involvement in the service department before they were invited. It supports what I'm saying, that it's no longer about spirituality or knowledge of the Bible or how likable a person is. It's about, can you look the other way? Can you stand up for an abusive regime that we need to perpetuate? We need to just continue this legacy that we've inherited. And it's going to involve you standing up for things that you've witnessed and perpetuating these terrible policies. Whether you personally agree with them or not, you've got to be okay with this if you want to rise to the very top of the ladder. And so when you have that sort of individual on the governing body, I can't see how that sort of individual, who again is complicit in facilitating child sexual abuse, would at any point do a Raymond Franz and think, I need to distance myself from this. This is wrong. If they were to do that, they would have to effectively turn themselves in, wouldn't they? They would, if they have any kind of integrity, they would need to say, look, what I did was wrong, so wrong that I deserve to be punished. I deserve to be prosecuted in some form, and so do my former colleagues who I'm leaving behind. That's why I think it's a bit too much of a stretch to suggest that there will ever be another Raymond Franz. I think he was unique. He was one of a kind. I just can't imagine another governing body member who is anything like as kind, as admirable, as eloquent, as wise and insightful as Raymond Franz was. And even if there was anyone even remotely approaching that sort of person, they would still have an awful lot of answering to do. Because the whole issue with child sexual abuse, although you could argue it was there in some form at least when Raymond Franz was on the governing body, it's certainly come more to the fore over the last 20 years. Raymond Franz commented on child sexual abuse to the effect that he wasn't aware of there being a problem when he was on the governing body. It wasn't something that came up or anything that came to his attention as being an issue as a governing body member. I don't know how you could make that claim now in 2021 when there is so much exposure of this issue. And rather than make corrective measures, rather than change the policy, the current governing body has doubled down, has spent years doubling down. And so no single member of the governing body can say, oh, I did what I could. I tried to make things right. No, they're all complicit. All of them are. But we can still ask the question, could you have a meaningful, high-profile defection? Because what's also happened in the 50 years since the governing body arrangement came into play is that you've had the growth or the rise of the governing body helper arrangement. And in the JW broadcasting era, these individuals who were always in the shadows, we knew they were there. We knew that there were such things as helpers. We just couldn't really imagine who they were or what they looked like or what they were called. In the JW broadcasting era, because the governing body couldn't themselves shoulder the burden of appearing on all the videos, they said, let's bring in our helpers and let's have our helpers present some of this content. The helpers have taken on a prominence that they never had before, to the point where if a governing body helper were to defect, that would be a huge deal, almost as huge as a governing body member defecting. Because these are individuals who are working shoulder to shoulder, to use Jehovah's Witness terminology. They're working shoulder to shoulder with the governing body. They're seeing them on a daily basis. They're able to witness the decision-making process to at least some degree. Okay, they're not able to sit in on governing body sessions, or at least all of the governing body sessions. They're still able to see an awful lot. And a governing body helper has the advantage of deniability when it comes to involvement in the cover-up of child sexual abuse. Not all of them do, by the way. Gary Bro, for example, is a helper to the service committee. He is directly involved in the cover-up of child sexual abuse. He's the one who famously went on JW Broadcasting in a morning worship talk saying we will never abandon our stance on the two-witness rule. Gary Bro is just as culpable as any governing body member when it comes to the cover-up of child abuse. But it's conceivable that you could have someone like, I hate naming names now, maybe even David Schaefer, Mark Newmare, someone who hasn't been personally involved in the cover-up of child abuse, who has nevertheless been defending a lot of the more heinous policies and teachings of the organization, but it is at least able to walk away and say, I denounce all of that. You know, I've changed my mind. I've changed my attitude. I can see that what I was doing was wrong. And now I want to spill the beans. I want to explain what's happening. And so I can imagine that happening in perhaps the next few years. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying I could imagine a defection of that kind, especially as the organization increasingly enters its death throes. I mean, last year, 2020, we had our first decline in publishers year on year. First time in 42 years that the organization has actually shrunk in a year. The last time being, of course, the fallout from 1975. Things are not looking good for the organization. In country after country, the organization was in decline in 2020, including large parts of Africa. JW Broadcasting is having no effect at all. If anything, it's making the problem worse, because millions of Jehovah's Witnesses are finally able to see the man behind the curtain. They're able to see how deluded, how detached from reality, how insincere the governing body members are. I just don't see a way out. I think we're past the point of no return when it comes to the decline, the steady decline of the organization. It may not implode all of a sudden, but it's certainly stagnating in terms of growth. It's downsizing, it's shrinking, there are less branches, kingdom halls are closing down, congregations are merging, and it can only shrink so much before there's like a snowball effect and people start realizing, okay, this isn't the religion I signed up for. Something's clearly wrong here. Maybe I ought to investigate for myself what critics have been saying so that I can understand what's happening. A governing body helper might take that opportunity, or might be witnessing all of this and be thinking, to what extent should I stay with a sinking ship? Do I want my name to be attached to this? Do I want this to be my legacy? Do I want to go to my grave, go into my old age, supporting this ailing organization that's bound to these toxic policies? Or do I want to break free and make a name for myself as someone who is highlighting these issues and helping to expose a cruel and abusive organization? I mean, with so many governing body helpers, there are dozens to choose from. You like to think that at least one of them, as the years clock on and as the organization gets closer and closer to the precipice, you like to think that at least one of them will think, I'm done with this. I'm walking away. I'm going to spill the beans. I'm going to let people know what this organization is really like. And when that happens, I don't think it will be as impactful as Crisis of Conscience was, or as impactful as a governing body defection would be, but it will certainly have a huge impact. And it will be a cause, especially due to the prominence that is afforded these individuals. It's not like the organization can disavow any knowledge of someone who has literally hosted one or more JW Broadcasting episodes. Can you imagine what would happen if someone like David Schaefer, and I'm not saying he would, by the way, I think David Schaefer is one of the more cringeworthy members. But can you imagine if someone like David Schaefer were to defect? What would they even do with the episodes that he's hosted? If he then turns around and starts criticizing the organization, what do they do with the hours of footage on the website where he's presenting? How do they cover that up? It would be like if JW Broadcasting had been around when Ray Franz had been a governing body member. Imagine if there'd been multiple episodes that Ray Franz had presented, and then he turned around and started criticizing the organization. They would just bury that content, wouldn't they? It would disappear like that from the website. And yeah, they'd try and erase that person from history, surely. So yes, that sort of cover-up alone would not go unnoticed. And you like to think it would have a big impact. Will this happen? We'll have to wait and see. But I can imagine it happening. I think it's possible or even likely that it could happen. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things pan out. And to a degree, we're already seeing the organization struggle as a result of defections, because people inside the organization are already leaking stuff out to apostate activists like myself. For years, we've been getting all the elders' letters. For years, we've been getting all of the updates to the Shepherd Book. We have the branch organization manual, a secret document that ordinary witnesses aren't allowed to read. We have the circuit overseer guidelines. We have any number of, top secret, eyes only organization documents that have been leaked out from the inside. These are essentially defectors. They are people inside the organization who don't feel able to do anything themselves, but they know that they can at least do something by keeping the flow of information coming. And right now, I have an individual inside the organization who's leaking me information about forthcoming videos. This is all incredibly helpful in shining a light on the organization. This is essentially a defection. It's kind of It's kind of a slow motion defection when you have people leaking information from the inside. The same thing happened, of course, with Pillowgate. The Pillowgate videos were the result of a leak. Following Pillowgate, to a degree, they clamped down on the leaks. I don't know what they did. Presumably, we're going to find out at some future point. But they clamped down on leaks. But that only lasted for a while. And already, I'm getting leaks again. I can tell you that. So it's very encouraging to know that there are people inside the organization. They may not be governing body members or helpers, but they're working with these men, and they know that it's wrong. They know that they are in an abusive, corrupt, exploitative organization. And they're figuring, well, at least I can help apostate activists. At least I can leak out information. At least I can do my small part while I'm here and while I'm figuring out what my next step is and how I can get the hell out of here. So that's already happening, and it bodes well for a potential situation in the future where we get a high-profile defection of perhaps a governing body helper. We shall see. But I would be very, very surprised if we ever get a governing body member defect, because the organization is now so corrupt and so abusive that any governing body member who defects will have an awful lot of answering to do and will basically have to turn themselves in. That's how serious things are now with the way the organization is covering up and facilitating abuse. So those were my thoughts on this question. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd be interested to see what you think about the prospect of a high-profile defection. But that's all I have for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.